Chapter 1, Losing Anonymity. October, 1986, MS-DOS. At the appearance of the personal computer in the world, it was only a matter of time before the new era will strike the state of Israel as well. I was at Dizengoff shopping mall in Tel Aviv, trying to find myself since I was unemployed at the time. When I entered the PC store, it was only because I had nothing else to do. The young salesman, who offered his help, could not have guessed that the person who just walked in had nothing to do with personal computers. In fact, I was trying to pass a few more minutes before going home one more time, without any end in sight to the agony of unemployment. "Can you give me an idea of what these television typewriters are?" I asked the young man, trying to pretend my ignorance in the subject is legitimate. "These are personal computers," he said, and added in an authoritative voice. "They can do just about anything imaginable. For instance, what do you do for a living?" Trying to justify the briefcase in my hand and the official appearance I had, I quickly answered, "I am a tech writer. I write documentation for aviation material for the Air Force, which was my last job, until a few weeks before." "Well then, splendid," he said, with a touch of victory in his voice. "You can use these machines to do all your word processing." As if I already didn't know it, he went on and explained all the advantages of a PC over the old typewriter machine. Then he went to a nearby shelf and yanked a small green cover soft pack book. This in itself is the soul of the computer. It's called MS-DOS. It's the operating system. The actual software that runs the computer, he said with enthusiasm. He handed me the book, which was actually an illegal copy of a title in English, published in Taiwan. "You see?" he said. "If you are a tech writer, try to write this book in Hebrew, you will make a great deal of money." "There is nothing on this subject in Hebrew," he said. And so, the snowball started to roll in my head. I had to figure out a way to keep the idea alive, since there was nothing I could do on the subject, without some initial assistance from him. "I am ready to translate this book," I said. "Are you interested in publishing it together as partners?" "Sure, but listen, you don't have to translate the entire book, only these chapters." And he took a pencil and marked the more relevant portions. "How long do you think it will take to finish the job?" he asked. "I am not sure," I said, "could be anything between 3 to 4 weeks, before I may have the initial handwritten draft." "Okay, I'll tell you what, go ahead with the work. By the time you have it done, call me. Here is my card. We will have it processed in a word processor and have it printed. I need it soon, so I can give it as a supportive documentation for every PC I sell." That in itself was enough to make me almost explode within myself. I realized the potential this book had. How come no one did it until now? I thought, as I was trying to conceal my excitement. So, during the next few weeks, I relentlessly studied the subject, before I could feel confident enough to begin the actual translation. Days upon days in the Bar Ilan library passed, as I tried to collect the relevant computer jargon in Hebrew, which was to be used in the book. Finally, I managed to gain enough knowledge to start the work. And so, it became the project of my life at the time. I didn't have the slightest idea what a hit it was going to be. Part of my motivation was to keep doing something, which actually was supposed to have been done by a professional computer master. Altogether, this should have been in the market long time ago. The fact I had nothing else to do gave me even more enthusiasm. In fact, I wrote the book in a different language. I developed great passion to the subject. The knowledge of computers came to me in the most thorough and intensive way. Without any prior knowledge about computers, I began to understand the subject thoroughly by translating the material from English to Hebrew. The subject started to fascinate me. I began to feel the profound impact it is going to have upon humankind. In some instances, during the long hours I sat in the quietness of the Bar Ilan library, I started to feel an internal power, which suddenly enabled me to comprehend obscure realities, even predict my future. Public domain. "This book is going to become public domain," something within me yelled. It took me 6 weeks to finish the project of translating the entire book. I translated everything in the book to Hebrew, not only those portions the guy from the PC store marked for me. During the time I was working on it, I contacted Ron a few times for professional advice and jargon-related questions. He was always there, but when I finally came to his PC store with the complete work, he lost interest in the project. The idea of going public together was not attractive to him anymore. Apparently, he had some changes in priorities, and he left for London a few weeks later. Thus, I was left alone with a project I started, without any idea how to complete. I felt I needed some professional backup, since I lacked the official education on the subject. I felt abandoned since I relied on the guy from the computer store for financing the project. I didn't have the necessary funds, but I knew the book was going to become a hit. I had no doubt the subject of personal computers was going to become widespread in every corner of life. In order to understand the operation of a computer, you had to understand the operating system, as it is the one basic software which actually runs the computer. The fact that the subject of MS-DOS was known at the time only to professionals within the computer industry, this project had the potential to make it available to anyone to understand and use a computer. In addition, the only literature on the subject which was available in Israel at the time was in high-tech English known only to computer professionals within the industry and academy. This made the prospect of the book very important and even a necessity. Financing the project was my next step. I didn't have the funds necessary to start the project. I considered approaching a publisher, but it was like giving away a gift handed to me by God. So, I decided to seek other sources to raise the funds I needed. I approached an official in IBM Tel Aviv, who was a publisher of computer books, and was the only source for computer books in Hebrew. He invited me to his office, after I told him about the initial draft on the subject of MS-DOS I had. As a naive persona I was then, I thought I could offer him to finance the project on a 50-50 basis. After examining the material, while in his office on the top floor of the IBM building in Tel Aviv, he asked me to leave the work with him for so-called deeper examination, just for one day. I suspected a theft of intellectual property. It was easy to copy the work, make minor changes in the editing portion, and publish it. This people from the upper class in high circles Israel had the court system in their pocket. I had to make a hard choice, to trust him or not. I didn't trust him. On the other side, he could be a perfect partner, since he was sitting at the heart of the entire industry of the computer world, which was IBM. In addition, he was a publisher and he could make it easy in every aspect. I finally gave up the idea of going along with him, because he offered me a fee based on publisher's share for writer's compensation, which was roughly 15%. I decided to run an ad in the paper seeking a potential investor. The response to the ad was tremendous. This was only a reassuring indication what hit it was going to be. I ran into a few crooks who tried to take the manuscript for so-called just for inspection. Finally, out of the desperation, I almost fell in the hands of one of those crooks. I finally managed to get a small loan from my family. By the time I had the book ready for print, it was already the season of high holidays in Israel. I had 500 copies printed in a rundown printing shop, in the industrial zone of Tel Aviv. The quality of the print was bad, but what was important was the fact that finally there was a source in Hebrew, for the widely feared subject of MS-DOS, written in simple language. The subject, which psychologically was feared by the non-professional, non-English speaking person, was finally available. Within the first week of the holiday of Sukkot, during which I attempted the distribution of samples only, I was left without a single copy. Not only I have sold every single copy I had, people in the PC marketing business ordered copies by the hundreds. Within the first 6 months since I started to publish the book, I sold more than 10,000 copies, all by myself without any help of a secretary, adequate transportation and without the help of a salesperson. The book became so widely known and demanded in the community of computers and computer stores Israel, orders of hundreds of books simply came in. I became famous. Anyone who had any touch to computers or computer science knew about the book of Shimon Marciano. Orders for the book came from university libraries, people from the academia, government offices, police, the army. The availability of the subject in plain, easy to comprehend language made it a must. 12 months later, losing freedom. Ever since I became occupied with the book, an internal feeling I had was that I actually possessed some power of authority. The fact that tens of thousands of people read what I had written and thought, gave me the feeling I managed to penetrate the mind of a big mass of people. An internal revelation descended on me one Friday, during the season of the high holidays in Israel. It struck my mind as I started to comprehend things which were obscured from me until then. One of the first things that occurred to me during this time, was that the actual existence of an entity so-called the Jewish state, systematically violates red-line taboos in Judaism. This cannot possibly come from within a so-called Jewish state. Something or somebody manipulates reality in a way which may seem to be so-called Jewish state, but actually maintains a culture of Goyim, people of the rest of the world. The principal issue I am talking about is Shabbat. It seems the name of Israel is being used by a stranger non-Jewish society who imposes a non-Jewish culture, anti-Jewish and anti-religion, on the Jewish people. Suddenly, it was so clear. This reality is actually so clear, it is widely ignored by the naive population, who believe they live under so-called Jewish state of Israel. These naive people are completely blind to the deception. What clues or signs did I have in order to confirm these feelings? It was one Saturday morning, in the middle of Shabbat services, in a small town near Tel Aviv, when a jumbo jet airliner flew very low above the synagogue, in the middle of Shabbat morning services. If it wasn't for the fact that it was in the middle of a prayer called Tefilat Shemini Esser, which is conducted in a complete silence, I might have not noticed it, since one gets used to such noises when living in or near the big city. It was such an obvious disrespect, when an entire congregation is aiming its prayer to the heavens, a jumbo jet airliner is flying above, making the heart of Judaism and Jewish identity, virtually a joke. I couldn't cope with it. Neither did I need any other clue to know that what is believed to be a so-called Jewish state, is actually nothing but an absolute lie. Who are the people that run this so-called Jewish state? The answer is not hard to figure. Every single aspect of life in Israel, is German-oriented. The political structure and organization are virtually identical to the German system, hence a parliament of so-called elected representatives and a president of a puppet nature. The entire public transportation is of German vehicles. 80% of all vehicles on the roads in Israel, is German-made. Virtually, all of manufacturing tools for the industry, medical equipment, agriculture tools, are all made in Germany. The entire judicial system is controlled and operated by German associated officials. Virtually, all high and Supreme Court's justices, maintain a non-Jewish, anti-religion ideology. All of the most important judicial decisions on religious issues, particularly Torah laws, are anti-Jewish decisions. The entire government and local municipalities, are running under people of anti-Jewish ideology. It is so simple to figure out. If you are not holding this anti-religion, anti-Jewish ideology, you have no chance to hold any such position. Simple. The entire mass communications media is controlled by people of the same ideological roots. No outsiders. Completely sterilized. For a nation that survived a so-called Holocaust, it is quite too much love to pour on Germany. Suddenly, things became clearer and clearer. All those unexplained events and realities, started to fall in place. Is it really possible that after so much stir and violent hurricane among the nations of the world, that Germany had caused, they simply got away with it? The supreme German leader who promised his devoted nation that Germany will rule the world for the next 1,000 years, really simply vanished somewhere in 1945? Or maybe it is a simple coincidence and so natural, that only 3 years after the elimination of most of the population of the Jewish communities in Europe, suddenly the establishment of the State of Israel? A so-called Jewish state, that would shortly evolve into one of the most powerful nuclear superpowers in the world? The Jewish people were never into technological development. The Jewish people were always occupied in grief for being lost in diaspora, suffering harassment, deep hatred, disgrace and scattered among all nations of the world. There is simply no logic in a so-called Jewish state that will lead such a huge gain in technological know-how, which would result in a huge military might and an arsenal of nuclear weapons. And it came to be after losing 1/6 of its entire population worldwide. A bigger, much bigger force is behind it. This force had to pose as Jewish and deceive all nations of the world, To believe they are dealing with Jewish people. Who is to benefit from what the state of Israel is? The answer is simple. The people who run and control the Jewish state. Who those people practically are? There is only one answer that fits. Germany. Those were the thoughts I came to think about, as I was grasping this reality. But the whole thing seemed at the time, too fictitious to be real, and most of all, dangerous to think it, let alone say it. Although, I did believe it's all real, I dared justify my thoughts in a concrete manner. I was naive. The first step in the path of becoming public enemy in the state of Israel occurred in May 1989. The notion that the prayers of my people are being put to a ridiculous joke by flying jumbo jet airliners during Shabbat and other holy days, right above synagogues and temples, annoyed me. I couldn't cope with it by letting go. Something had to be done. I sat down next to my desk and decided to challenge the judicial system of the so-called Jewish state of Israel. What could be more appropriate than to challenge the Supreme Court on such a big issue? The Supreme Court appeal I filed in early May 1989 was the trigger that will put me into the spotlight of those who are actually behind this huge deception. The organization which executes the entire scheme. The people who actually run and control everything in this entity. The Secret Service. Namely the Shabak. Service of the General Security. Shabak is an organization with ideological roots adopted from the East German secret police Stasi. The structure, the methods, the knowledge, the people who first laid the foundations to the so-called Shabak, during the early days of the Zionist state, all came from the East German Stasi. The appeal I filed against the State of Israel did not leave much room for the justices. A huge decision had to be made on a principal judicial issue. It was a matter of either the core nature of the State of Israel is Jewish, or non-Jewish. If they would rule in favor of the state, on the grounds that it is the freedom to act, or freedom to be expressed, or any of this freedom BS, then it would clearly stand against the basic core of the Declaration of Independence, which states clearly that all religions are entitled to be worshipped in a respectable manner. The very issue of my appeal proved that the only religion in the State of Israel, which is not being kept in a respectable manner, is Judaism. If it was a religious issue appealed to the so-called Supreme Court, by a Muslim or a Druze or a Christian, or by any other non-Jewish entity, the matter would have gained the utmost attention by the court and the media. Instead, the reply I received to my motion was that it is not within this court's jurisdiction to decide on the matter. We suggest you apply to the appropriate authorities. The reply came by mail only 10 days after I filed the appeal, but at the same time, I also received an invitation for military reserve service for 1 month. And here comes trouble. 1 month of unexplained harassment by the commanding officers during reserve service hardly passed without a disastrous reaction on my part, for I could not bear the humiliation. I was put in jail because I was late 20 minutes, returning to base after a weekend vacation. 20 minutes late. Jail, 7 days, including all the disgrace and humiliation they could throw on me while in jail. And it was humiliating. 7 days of constant humiliation. This is not during the mandatory 3 years service I did when I was 18 years old. This is a reserve service when I was in the best part of my 30s already. Reserve service was considered a vacation from work and wife, for everyone. I came back home after 1 month of agony, determined to do something about the treatment I received for no reason. But as time went by, I kind of gave up and went on with my life as usual. But life was not usual for me anymore. Unexplained things started to happen to me and around me. I started to feel being constantly watched. My phone was taped, my snail mail started to arrive half opened. In short, I felt like I was constantly followed. It was a strong feeling. There was no doubt it was actually happening to me. In the beginning, I felt some kind of disbelief this was actually happening to me. Then rage replaced disbelief. Why? Am I the enemy? Very soon I discovered I am being considered the enemy. It was on the high holy days of Rosh Hashanah, when the final blow to my Israeli identity occurred. During the month of Elul prior to Rosh Hashanah, I usually had the habit of going to Jerusalem to Temple Mount, to pray Selihot, which are the prayers of forgiveness before the high holidays. One of the nights during the month of Elul I boarded a bus to Jerusalem from the central station in Tel Aviv. Immediately after I boarded the bus and sat, I started to sense something not so good is going to happen. The so-called security guard who was sitting not too far from the driver, was in civilian clothes and was supposed to guard against any attack on the driver. This arrangement started on buses to Jerusalem, after a deadly attack on a bus driver which forced the bus to fall from A. I noticed very clearly that this security guard kept staring at me, prior to the bus leaving the station. A few minutes after the bus left the station, the guy walked to me and demanded an ID. Now, in order to grasp the situation at the moment, one should realize that apart from the fact I wore a yarmulke, and had the special plastic case used to carry the tefillin, talith and prayer book, this security guard had no reason to suspect I was an Arab. There was no reason to suspect I am an Arab. Apart from that, the fact that when I opened my mouth and answered him in clear succinct Hebrew, this should have been enough to remove any suspicion I was an Arab. I told him that since he is a civilian, he should ID himself as police first. If he was an officer of the law, either military or police, it was obvious he had something else in mind. Clearly it was not security. Within seconds the whole incident became a loud argument. I refuse to ID to a civilian, and he refuses to ID as police. By the time he did agree to ID himself, it was with a statement that I was under arrest, and as soon as the bus will arrive to Jerusalem, I will be arrested. It's hard for me to point the connection between the appeal I filed a few months before, and the fact I had to spend the next 48 hours in a Jerusalem jail. The humiliation and despair I suffered were too profound, on what I thought about Zionists from then on. It was soon to become the last straw. A quick look through the telephone directory, one can find the number of people with clear German origin. Names that have nothing to do with Jews, like Brandt, Hertz, Schmidt and so. And it makes you wonder, how stupid the entire world can be, to still believe they are dealing with a Jewish state? So, my harassment didn't just stop after challenging the Supreme Court of the State of Israel for false imprisonment, it got worse. During the next few months, I started to feel that approaching the fight against my harassment through more aggressive ways, like renouncing my Israeli citizenship, by a direct letter to the president, my days were numbered. I knew what is the duty of the Secret Service is, and how it is expected to deal with anti-society figures like me. And in a society that human life is not very dear as long as everything is done quietly. An unimportant person, with virtually no ties and no support, and with so much potential to disturb the smoothness of public opinion, actually pose more trouble alive, than if he was to be eliminated. So, a decision was made to simply eliminate me. I felt it, I knew it, I was not willing to take the chance of getting killed in a prearranged accident of any sort. Everything around me indicated that this is what is going to happen next. Even if I was simply paranoid, still I could not ignore the huge change in life around me. My anonymity was taken away from me. Plainly putting it, is to say that my life was not going to be the same ever again. I dared mess around with the Zionist Jews. I could not bear in mind the fact that the freedom of anonymity I enjoyed all my life, just because I was as stupid as everyone else, will never be part of me again. The burden of someone always on top of my privacy, simply sent chills through my spine. I had to do something quickly before I become an accident statistic. Buying a ticket and boarding an airplane was as stupid an idea as to think that the long arm the Israeli Secret Service will not reach me anywhere abroad, even more easily than inside their own territory. More so, the fact that if I ever have a chance to do any damage by unauthorized whistleblowing, it can be outside of Israel. So, this possibility was ruled out. Staying in Israel meant sitting like a duck and waiting for them to take the initiative. I could not risk falling on the Secret Service's mercy. Mercy does not exist for them. They have all the sophistication, manpower, and equipment and resources, to stay on top anyone they choose, at all times, thus, deciding my fate at will. No. There is no way I simply stay cool doing nothing. Something had to be done. I didn't know what I was going to do, I kept moving all the time. One of the methods these people use, is to degrade the self-confidence of a target, simply by letting him know they exist. The outcome of it may be either entering vertigo of paranoia, or simply losing contact with rationality. It is achieved by fear and uncertainty in the victim himself. I don't know why, but for some reason, it was clear to me that they underestimated my ability to know and understand. From then on, I felt I gained some advantage over their acts. This enhanced my confidence. I started to believe in myself. In other words, I was given some kind of pressure relief just by understanding the situation. Sometimes I found myself holding my head in disbelief. No. This cannot be happening to me. After all, I am not the enemy. I was born here, I served mandatory 3 years in the army, I volunteered to an elite field unit, all my family is here. This simply cannot be true. I never meant any harm to anything or anyone. As the days passed by and I saw no end to the invasion of my privacy, I started to feel like an enemy in my country. Every now and then they would step up the pressure, and then it was simply unbearable. The high holy days of Passover found me in complete isolation. There was no one I could trust in telling my problem. On top of all the loneliness I was in, my personal life was of no existence for the last few years since my divorce. The loneliness had an even greater impact on me during the holidays. I decided to spend the Seder of Pesach, in an organized public Seder, in a luxury hotel in Eilat. This was a decision I made completely independent of the fact that I was constantly under the watchful eye of the Shabak. This decision was about to be of grave consequences in the years to come. I arrived in Eilat at Passover Eve just in time to establish myself in hotel, and take a quick shower before I had to get down to the lobby to check my reservation for the Seder feast. Everything felt holiday. Even the fact that someone was on top of me all the time didn't really matter. The feeling that surrounded the inside and outside of the hotel gave me a strong, reassuring sense of belonging. The young children, running around in the lobby yelling and screaming, groups of people gathering in the formation of what seemed as families, gave me the feeling of home, despite the fact that I was lonely. When the chief cantor finally arrived in the lobby, everyone greeted him with smiles and Hag Sami greetings. I felt I was the only one in the entire lobby that didn't actually know the Rabbi. As usual, in public occasions like this, I was forced to be super polite, which was not so bad, unless I was practically starved. I couldn't touch anything until the ceremony of reading the Haggadah was completely over. Adding to the fact that I was alone, sitting right next to a young couple, that by the nature of their conversation, it seemed they have just recently met, contrary to their effort to create a feeling they are together for a long time already. I must admit, I genuinely enjoyed the evening, especially after the meal, when everybody started to sing Seder Pesach poems. By the end of the evening, I was completely exhausted and fell asleep in my room, even without turning the lights off. The next morning was an unbelievingly quiet, beautiful holiday morning. I woke up cheerful enough to forget the fact that I was alone in a hotel. Immediately after refreshing myself, I got down to the hotel restaurant for breakfast. I had to figure out a plan for the day, since I was about to remain for one more night to end the first day of Passover. So, right after breakfast, I decided to get down to the most southern seashore, called Hof Almog. The memories I had from the place since my younger days simply kept me going there every time I was in Eilat. This time was no different. The climate in Eilat is unique, by the fact that almost year-round it is hot, I mean, really hot, and very dry since it is a desert town. To the south of the town, lies the Egyptian border and the Gulf of Aqaba with its crystal-clear water, which looks like the Garden of Eden, when you look at it from the top of the mountains that lie right above the west side of the city. To the east of the city, stretches the Gulf of Aqaba, and in a distance, you can see the mountains of Moab, which are part of the Jordanian kingdom. Right beneath those mountains, and in the very tip of the Gulf, lies the city of Aqaba, the only port city of the Jordanian kingdom. On the most southern part of the Gulf of Aqaba, you can still see in a clear day, yet another tip of a huge desert, the Arabian Peninsula. The topographical shape of the entire region gives the place a unique atmosphere of warmth and tranquility. Here and there, you can still catch in a distance, a Bedouin riding a camel passing by you, and that in itself is enough to give you a feeling of being sent back in time thousands of years when Moses and the sons of Israel camped here and called the place Eilat, Etzion Gaver. This was the route that took Bnei Yisrael to the Promised Land. A taxi cab arrived about a minute after I asked for it at the reception. "Hofal mode please," I told the driver. When we arrived, about 15 minutes later, I was astonished to discover that the place was completely rearranged. It was not an open seashore, as I thought it would be. Instead, the entire 1-mile shore was completely surrounded by a high fence of barbed wire. This completely robbed the place of the unique freedom feeling it was known for in the past. During the early 1970s, young tourists used to seek this place for the entire time they had in Israel. Pink Floyd music kept running around the clock, in the famous Ben Harosh pub, right on the sand of the seashore. People were lying on the sand day and night, completely isolated from the world. For me, to spend a week there was to actually be out of the country, on a tropical-style vacation. So, the disappointment I encountered when I first arrived after more than a decade, since the last time I was there, was profound. I simply had too many memories that completely contradicted what I saw. The authorities of nature preservation read the sign, on what seemed to be the entrance building. I paid the cab driver and headed straight to the entrance. From a distance, I could see that in order to enter the shore you actually had to buy a ticket. I went on and paid for the right to enter what was for granted to me ever since I came to Eilat. I was not going to give up the unique vacation feeling, despite a fence that gave the impression of an isolation camp, in a place that symbolized freedom to me. The crisp clear water was too much of a temptation not to take a dive in the chilly water. I spent about 3 hours in the place, before I had to run from the frying sun, which made my skin completely red and burning. When I gathered my things and started to go to the main entrance, the place was already full of a lot of people, especially beautiful young women, lying on the sand sunbathing in the punishing hot noon. From a distance I could see a patrol jeep of the natural authorities patrolling the shore, driving right among the hundreds of people who laid on the beach. At first, I didn't pay too much attention to it and kept going toward the main entrance. When I was about halfway to the main gate, the jeep pulled right next to me, and in a very awkward way, tried to make the impression of a security incident handling, as the 2 young men jumped outside in front of me and shouted, "Hey you, stop." I froze in the place where I was standing. I didn't look like an Arab or a Bedouin, or anyone that was unusual to the general landscape of the place. I wore a pair of Ray-Bans, had a black cap on my head and was carrying a small plastic bag, with a towel and a news magazine in it. "Do you have an ID?" asked one of them in a commanding tone. "Yes, sure," I answered in a straightforward fashion. I started to feel really unsecured. I didn't like the way people around looked at us. It made me feel like I was either a criminal caught red-handed committing a crime in the street or a suspect terrorist. It was annoying. I pulled out my ID, which I always carry with me, and handed it over to the guy. "What seems to be the problem, may I ask?" "Nothing, just give me your ticket." "Where is your ticket? How did you get in?" It didn't make sense to me at the moment. I started to look for the ticket inside the plastic bag. I was horrified at the idea that I could have discarded it, first thing after I entered the place. These 2 fellows were going to arrest me right there, if I don't come up with the damn ticket. I knew it. They were ready to do it to me. I felt it in their voice. "So where, in name of the Lord, is the ticket I paid for?" I kept looking for it in the plastic bag first, then inside the news magazine between the pages. Finally, I found it in my wallet. There was the little piece of paper that will save me the agony of a ruined holiday, and the huge frustration of being arrested for such a stupid reason. The impression of somewhat disappointment these 2 had when they finally let go of me was obvious. I paced faster out, and found myself in the hotel room trying to understand what was it in me that, of all the people that were there on the beach, I attracted the attention of the authorities. There was nothing I could see that will give me an answer. The choking feeling of helplessness started to creep inside my soul, as I started to realize I lost my freedom forever. Things will never be the same for me again as I enjoyed the sweet luxury of anonymity, for the 35 years of my life.